Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and in today's video, I'm continuing my series of ranking all the items in Dragon Age Origins. It's time to score the special companion items, the Kaddis and collars for the dog, and the small and large crystals for Shale. As with my other rankings, I'm giving each item a score from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. I'll be ranking items within each category, only comparing it to other items of the same type. Obviously, Dog and Shale don't have many different item types they can use, just 2, but even so, you can't compare between the two item types since they are meant to achieve different things. You also have to take into consideration that some items may only be useful for certain types of builds, in which case that means a lower overall score. Even with the limited amount of items for these special companions, this can still happen. But of course, I will explain exactly why I give each item a specific score. Before we get into the rankings, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members. I appreciate all of you so much. Joining as a member would help the channel out a lot, but of course only do it if you want to and can afford it. I'm always thankful even if you just like the video if you enjoyed it and maybe leave a comment. Let's begin the ranking with the dog, since you can recruit the dog earlier than Shale, either from your origin story if you're a human noble or immediately after Ostagar otherwise. The dog has 2 equipment slots, one for Kaddis, a special war paint, and one for a collar. You can probably guess, but these items don't come near the kinds of stats that a regular humanoid character gets with their weapons, armor, and accessories. The dog is obviously not a full companion, since it is just a war dog, so it kind of makes sense that the gear can't add as much as regular people items. But the dog can actually be useful in certain situations, like for example against werewolves or other enemies that have the overwhelm ability, since dog is completely immune to that. Furthermore, dog's base health is high, so that means you can use it as a fairly good tank, at least in the first half of the game. The only problem on PC is that the Minbari doesn't have access to warrior talents, even though it does on consoles. If you know how to use the in-game console, you can give it the warrior talent tree while the dog is in your party by writing this command into the console. Run script, add talent, 4022. I'll write this console command in the description as well, just in case you want to use it. If you want dog to be a good party member for the entire game, then I really do recommend giving him the warrior talents in some way, because if it has warrior talents, you can use the taunt and threaten abilities and thus make dog into a proper tank. If you don't know how to use console commands and want a mod instead, I can recommend the Full Combatant Dog mod. This one makes a lot more changes than just adding the warrior talents though, like the warrior specialization being available as well. Personally, I don't give dog any specializations other than maybe Reaver, which could technically work. You'll want to read the mod's description for yourself to see if you're okay with all the changes. Anyway, I felt like it was important to add this here since if you're watching this, you may be interested in using dog in your party more. I do have a build guide for the dog, but I didn't include these details in my original guide. I may make an updated version of it sometime in the future, but for now, the info I gave you here about the warrior talents through console commands or a mod should help, together with my in-depth scoring of Kaddis and collars. Starting with the Kaddis, there are 12 options. Most of them are defensive in nature, though there are a few offensive and utility options too. Kaddis of Hakon Winter's Breath grants plus 30% cold resistance and is found in a chest in the kennel of Redcliffe Castle. As with anything granting cold res, it's not good because there just aren't enough enemies dealing cold damage for this to be relevant. 1 out of 5. Kaddis of the Courser grants plus 2 dexterity and is sold by Barlin in the Lothering Tavern. This is one of the best base game war paints because it increases defense and also attack by a little bit. Especially in the early game, the dog has a lot of health, so it can act as a good tanky character until you can get your other warriors up to speed, so increasing its dexterity is a great choice since dog will be less likely to get hit, while also being more likely to hit. 4 out of 5. Kaddis of the Lady of the Skies grants plus 30 physical resistance and is found in a chest in the Templar quarters of the Circle Tower. I'm not sure how to feel about this Kaddis, because on one hand, that's a lot of physical resistance. But on the other hand, since dog is a dog, it has a fairly high starting strength and constitution, and so it also has pretty good physical resistance. If you're trying to use the dog as a tank, especially on consoles or on PC with the added warrior talents, then this Kaddis may actually be better defensively than the dexterity one. This is because the dog obviously doesn't have access to weapon talents, and so can't get the immunity to stuns or knockdowns from either Shield Wall or Indomitable. This won't be as useful in the base PC game where you don't have the warrior talents on dog, but it's still a solid choice allowing the dog to be more likely to resist physical disabling effects. 3 out of 5 with a mention that it would be a 4 or even a 5 if you have the warrior talents and are using dog as a tank. Kaddis of the Mountain Father grants plus 20% nature and spirit resistance and is sold by Heren at Wade's Emporium in Denram. This Kaddis at least has dual resistances, though not that many enemies deal nature or spirit damage, so this is one of those very situational items that could be a little useful in some fights, but not enough for me to recommend it. 2 out of 5 since it does have some potential use. Kaddis of the Siegebreaker grants plus 30% fire resistance and is sold by the innkeeper at the Lake Callanhad Inn. While it's a single resistance, fire damage is fairly common, so it's more useful than any other elemental resistance. Great against rage demons, dragons, fire arrows from various archers, and fire spells from spellcasters. I may use this in fights against the High Dragon and Flemeth, and maybe a little bit in the Circle Tower because a lot of the demons there deal fire damage, and the abominations explode into a fireball after they die. Not bad, but still situational. 3 out of 5. Kaddis of the Trickster grants plus 3 damage and is sold at Alamar's Emporium in Orzammar's Dust Town. This is one of my favorite war paints since the only other ways to increase damage is by putting points into strength and using a weapon enchantment like flaming or frost weapons. Plus 3 is a fairly significant amount, especially due to the limited equipment slots, so I definitely recommend picking this up if you're using dog as more of a tanky damager rather than a fully defensive tank. 4 out of 5. Swift Runner Warpaint grants plus 2 dexterity and plus 2 damage, and can be obtained during the Return to Ostagar DLC. This essentially combines the Courser and Trickster Warpaints and is overall better than both. You get a defense and attack from the dexterity, while also getting increased damage for the dog. Best of both worlds. 5 out of 5 with the mention that you may prefer a different, more defensive-focused Kaddis for a tank or in specific fights. Warpaint of the Tempest grants plus 30% electricity resistance and is found in a chest in the kennel of Redcliffe Castle. Not enough enemies deal electricity damage for this to be worth using. 1 out of 5. Warpaint of the Vanguard grants plus 1 combat stamina regen and is sold by Barlin in Lothering Tavern. Since the dog doesn't have a huge amount of abilities, I'm not sure how important it is to get the stamina regen. On the other hand, dog starts with lower stamina and also can't get bonuses to willpower or stamina from multiple items, like regular party members do, due to only having 2 gear slots. So this may be a good choice if you're using dog as a tank with warrior abilities and want it to be able to use its talents more often, especially if you just added the warrior abilities with the console instead of the mod, since dog stamina will still be fairly low. 3 out of 5. Warpaint of the Waking Sea grants plus 0.25 combat health regen and is sold by Alarith in the Denram Alienage. This is something you only have access to super late in the game during the Landsmeet, and the bonus is a joke. You will not feel the difference that 0.25 HP every 2 seconds gives. Even on consoles where it's 0.5, it's still not worth it. 1 out of 5. Warpaint of the West Hills grants plus 9 defense and is sold by Owen in his upgraded stock after you save Redcliffe and his daughter. This is a great option for a tanky dog to ensure that it avoids getting hit by physical attacks as much as possible. However, if you choose this, you're losing out on the Lady of the Sky's physical resistance, which may be more important, or an elemental resistance in specific fights. Still, this is one of the war paints I use fairly often because the bonus is large enough. 4 out of 5. Warpaint of the Wolfhound grants plus 4 damage versus beasts and is found in a chest in the Tower of Vishal during the Ostagar prologue. If you're taking the dog along with you to places like the Brazilian Forest and Ruins for Nature of the Beast, because of his immunity to the Overwhelm ability, then this would be great for the extra damage to wolves, werewolves, bears, spiders, which are all found in the forest and ruins. The other area you may want to use this occasionally in is the Deep Roads in fights against deep stalkers and spiders. But that's about it. Other than these areas and a few random encounters where you fight wolves, bears, or dogs, it's obviously useless. Very situational, so 2 out of 5. These Kaddis options highlight that there's 2 builds for the dog, a somewhat tanky damager or a proper tank, especially if you have the warrior talents. The Kaddises are good for both, though more for defenses. And even if you pump up the dog's strength, it will only do so much damage, so you'd still be using the dog more for its tankiness and utility, especially the Dread Howl talent which stuns enemies in a large area, and the Overwhelm ability that disables a non-undead humanoid character for a good amount of time and can't be resisted. But let's see what you can add in the second slot of dog's gear with collars. There are 10 collars, 11 if you count the prank gift, which even in its base game form is bad. Most collars have bonuses to attack and armor, or armor penetration and armor, so there's not much variety here, and you'll see that obviously the collars with the higher bonuses are rated higher. Black Leather Collar grants plus 0.5 AP and plus 2 armor. It's looted from a Mabari in Redcliffe Castle during the Arl of Redcliffe main quest. It's fine enough for an early game item that you get for free, but it extremely quickly loses relevance. 2 out of 5. Black Metal Torque grants plus 6 attack and plus 6 armor and is sold by Bodan in the party camp for 5 gold and 62 silver. It's good, but there's no point in wasting your money because you can get other great collars for free. 3 out of 5 technically, but realistically, don't bother buying it. Firestone Harness grants plus 25% cold resistance and plus 4 attack and is looted from a Mabari during the Return to Ostagar DLC. The cold resistance is useless and the bonus to attack is too small, so I don't recommend it. 1 out of 5. Lord's Hunting Jabbet grants plus 4 attack and plus 4 armor and is sold by Farron in the Frostback Mountains. This is worse than the collar Bodan sells, and as before, you can get better options for free, so this one isn't worth either. 2 out of 5 technically, but don't buy it. Mabari Dog Chain grants plus 1 AP and plus 4 armor, and is sold at the Wonders of Thedas in Denram. It's decent enough, but it has the same problem as the ones sold by Bodan and Farron. You can get better stuff for free easily. 2 out of 5, but don't buy it. Mabari War Harness grants plus 2 AP and plus 8 armor, and is found in a chest in the Templar quarters of the Circle Tower during Broken Circle. You can very easily complete the Mage Main quest early, so this is an amazing free collar. The plus 8 armor is huge, on par with a high-tier light chest piece for a regular companion or a mid-tier medium armor. Considering the fact that this is pretty much the only source of armor the dog gets, I recommend using a collar with a high armor bonus, and this one is my personal favorite, though the one you get from killing the High Dragon is also good. In general, you want to increase the dog's strength, dexterity, and constitution, so it will have a decent attack score from strength and dex, and I'd rather get a bit of armor penetration for the dog since this is an area where the dog will struggle compared to the other party members who will have AP built into their weapons. So the Mabari War Harness gets a 5 out of 5 for helping the dog with both armor and armor penetration, both of which it desperately needs. Protective Cone grants plus 4 attack, plus 4 armor, and has the penalty of low morale and minus 2 dexterity. It's a prank gift from the Feast Day Pranks DLC, and this one is really not meant to be good. The penalty to dexterity hurts, and if you have Dane's fixes, the low morale effect will actually grant further penalties of minus 2 armor, minus 5 defense, and minus 2 damage if you have that specific fix installed. Even in the base game though, I still wouldn't recommend using this, since you're losing out on both attack and defense from the dex penalty, and the bonuses aren't good enough. 1 out of 5. Pure Bitch Braid grants plus 8 attack and plus 8 armor, and is looted from the High Dragon on the mountaintop. This one is far more difficult to obtain than the Mabari War Harness, and in my opinion is also slightly worse, since the dog will likely have a good attack score if you invested in its strength and dexterity. Still, it's my second overall choice because it has very good stats. 5 out of 5. Steel Spiked Collar grants plus 1.5 AP and plus 6 armor, and is looted from a pile of bones in the East Brazilian forest. If you decide to tackle the Nature of the Beast main quest first, maybe you're afraid of higher level werewolves and want to defeat them as quickly as possible, then this is a great free option you can use until you either get the Mabari War Harness or the High Dragon Collar. 4 out of 5. Throwback Harness grants plus 2 attack and plus 2 armor, and is sold by Farron in the Frostback Mountains. I find it weird that Farron sells both the plus 2 and plus 4 collars, because why would you ever buy the plus 2 one from him? Just because it's cheaper? It makes no sense. Would have been way better if the plus 2 collar was available in Lothering or Redcliffe. Regardless, this collar sucks. 1 out of 5. Worn Studded Braid grants plus 2 constitution, and it's the dog's starting gear. It's actually not bad, especially for the early game, because the extra constitution adds plus 10 health to the dog's already high health pool, as well as some physical resistance, which is welcome. So don't feel like you have to rush to get one of the shitty armor collars just because this one doesn't have any armor. It's totally fine to wait until you get one of the free collars. So the conclusion for collars is that you don't have to spend any money on them because the best ones are free. I would have liked to see a bit more variety here, but to be fair, what stats can you even add to a dog collar? Maybe some more constitution or health bonuses, or physical resistance, and some more elemental resistances. But even so, the collars with bonuses to armor would reign supreme, so all collars would need armor bonuses as a base to stand a chance. These have been the dog items, an unfortunately small list, especially since I do very much like the dog as a party member, but it is what it is. Moving on to Shale's crystals. Shale also has 2 equipment slots, but hers are way better designed than the dog's. The small crystals act as her weapons, and the large crystals act as her armor. Plus, if you combine a small and large crystal of the same type, you get a set bonus of plus 10% elemental resistance of that type, which is not amazing, but it's neat thematically. Don't feel like you need to match the small and large crystals. In fact, often it's better to mix them, get the best element for your small crystal to do the correct damage type against the enemies you're facing, and use possibly a different type of large crystal for the general or defensive bonuses that you need. Starting with the small crystals, there are 5 elements of crystals: fire, ice, lightning, nature, spirit, and 5 tiers for each element: chipped, flawed, clear, flawless, and brilliant. I'm going to talk about each element on the whole and rate them overall, with of course the understanding that the higher tier crystals are obviously better. The chipped and flawed versions of the crystals are very weak, only offering very small bonuses, so I won't discuss them. For the simple purpose of doing the correct elemental damage or having a useful elemental resistance, of course use the ones that are the best in the situation you find yourself in, but the crystals start to become far more interesting in terms of choice once they reach the clear tier, aka tier 3. Small fire crystals have base weapon stats: damage, critical chance, armor penetration, plus their damage scales with strength, and they convert all of Shale's damage into fire damage. They also have bonuses to fire damage, melee crit chance, and extra damage. Unfortunately, they don't have any rune slots. The chipped and flawed tiers just grant small fire damage bonuses. The clear crystal has plus 2% melee crit chance, plus 3 to all weapon damage, and plus 15% fire damage. The flawless crystal has plus 3% melee crit chance, plus 4 to all weapon damage, and plus 22.5% fire damage. And finally, the brilliant crystal has plus 5% melee crit chance, plus 5 to all weapon damage, and plus 30% fire damage. Fire damage is amazing most of the time because Darkspawn and Undead are weak to it, and few creatures are outright immune to fire damage. Demons are resistant to fire damage, so in fights against many demons, like in the Circle Tower, it's best to have a different element. And of course, Rage Demons and Ash Wraiths are completely immune, since they're literally fire demons. Drakes and dragon-type enemies, excluding high dragons, are also immune to fire, but high dragons for some reason aren't. But these enemy types are the only ones to remember to use an alternate small crystal for. Otherwise, the small fire crystals are absolutely amazing for damage. There may be certain builds, like a tank build, for which you actually prefer to use a different element, but if you plan on using Shale as more of a damager character, this is the best option most of the time. 5 out of 5. Small ice crystals have the same base weapon stats, and they convert all of Shale's damage into cold damage. They also have bonuses to cold damage, armor penetration, and critical or backstab damage. The chipped and flawed tiers just grant small cold damage bonuses. The clear crystal has plus 1 AP, plus 5% crit or backstab damage, and plus 15% cold damage. The flawless crystal has plus 2 AP, plus 10% crit or backstab damage, and plus 22.5% cold damage. And the brilliant crystal has plus 3 AP, plus 15% crit or backstab damage, and plus 30% cold damage. I'll say it up front, this is the worst type of small crystal. Cold just isn't a good element. Undead have 75% resistance to it, ogres are also fairly resistant, and arcane horrors, revenants, and witherfang are completely immune. Only one single enemy type is a tiny bit weak to cold, and that's spiders, and there aren't enough of them in the game for this to matter. But it's also the armor penetration and crit or backstab damage that aren't good on Shale. She only has 2 gear slots and doesn't have enough crit chance to guarantee she can use the extra crit damage effectively. Armor penetration isn't really needed since small crystals have a decent base AP from 4 to 8 points depending on tier, so I can't give the crystals anything higher than a 1 out of 5. They're usable against most enemies other than the super resistant or immune ones, but this just won't feel nearly as good as using fire or even lightning or spirit. Small lightning crystals have the same base weapon stats, and they convert all of Shale's damage into electricity damage. On top of that, they have bonuses to electricity damage, dexterity, and attack. The chipped and flawed crystals only have small bonuses to electricity damage. The clear crystal has plus 2 dex, plus 4 attack, and plus 15% electricity damage. The flawless crystal has plus 4 dex, plus 6 attack, and plus 22.5% electricity damage. And the brilliant crystal has plus 6 dex, plus 10 attack, and plus 30% electricity damage. This is an amazing option if you want Shale to be more of a tank or are fighting an enemy who is immune or highly resistant to fire. The extra dex increases both her attack and defense. You get extra attack to ensure Shale's attacks are more likely to hit, and electricity damage is actually a great type since few enemies are resistant to it and no enemies are immune to it. Electricity damage also has the added bonus of draining stamina from warrior or rogue type enemies. I'd personally still use fire crystals when I'm fighting darkspawn, undead, and sylvans, and switch to lightning when I'm fighting other enemies. Or if you don't want to deal with the hassle of switching Shale's weapon, it's perfectly fine to use this everywhere. 5 out of 5. Small natural crystals have the same base weapon stats just like the other ones, and they unfortunately convert all of Shale's damage to nature damage. They have bonuses to nature damage, constitution, and combat health regen. The chipped and flawed crystals only have small bonuses to nature damage, and in this case I recommend against using them at all. The clear crystal has +2 constitution, +2 combat health regen, and +15% nature damage. The flawless crystal has +4 constitution, +4 combat health regen, and +22.5 nature damage. And the brilliant crystal has +6 constitution, +6 combat health regen, and +30% nature damage. Here's the thing, nature damage sucks. Darkspawn are fairly resistant to it, and there are a ton of enemies completely immune to it. All the corpses, skeletons, golems, revenants, any undead enemies at all, abominations, and arcane horrors. So whenever you fight any of these enemies, Shale will be dealing 0 damage to them if she has a natural small crystal. However, this type of small crystal does have one redeeming quality, its defensive capability. If you are building Shale to be a pure tanky character who is just there to soak up damage and likely buff up her allies with stone aura, then this is the perfect crystal for that, since Shale doesn't care at all about dealing damage. You will have to remember that she will likely not be able to damage most enemies though, so make sure to keep your other party members alive and well equipped to deal damage. Shale will not be doing anything other than drawing enemy aggression and soaking up damage like a champ. For its use in this particular Shale build, this type of crystal would get a 5 out of 5. However, because it's literally useless for pretty much any other application, I have to give it a 2 out of 5. Small spirit crystals have the same base weapon stats, and they convert all of Shale's damage to spirit damage. They also have bonuses to spirit damage, all attributes, and armor penetration. The chipped and flawed crystals just have small bonuses to spirit damage. The clear crystal has +1 to all attributes, +1 AP, and +15% spirit damage. The flawless crystal has +2 to all attributes, +1.5 AP, and +22.5% spirit damage. And the brilliant crystal has +3 to all attributes, +2 AP, and +30% spirit damage. This is an all-around solid choice for Shale for any of her builds. No enemies are immune to spirit damage, and very few enemies have resistances to it, and those resistances are small. The bonus to all attributes increases all of Shale's stats, so while you're not getting a high amount of one particular stat or attribute, Shale will feel more balanced. This is usually my second choice after fire tied with lightning crystals. It's a matter of preference between the two. I'd probably use this over the lightning crystals if I cared about Shale's damage output, because the bonus to all attributes and AP contributes more towards that. The lightning crystals are more useful for a tanky Shale or a ranged focused one with rock mastery. Since enemies aren't immune to either lightning or spirit, you could pick one of these and use it for the entire game without having to switch off in certain fights. The bonus to AP doesn't feel as bad here as for the ice crystals because it has other useful bonuses alongside it. Overall, the third amazing option that gets a 5 out of 5. So as you can see, the ice crystals are the worst out of the bunch together with the natural crystals, but at least the natural ones have one specific use with stone aura that makes them good. Moving on to Shale's large crystals. They have exactly the same 5 elements and 5 tiers that the small crystals have. The main difference is that the large crystals act as an armor piece with an armor score and fatigue percentage attached to them. They seem to have the fatigue of a high-tier heavy chest piece, but an armor score that is lower than that until it gets to the flawless crystal tier, and of course the fatigue also goes up with the tiers. It feels like a bit too much of a fatigue penalty, seeing as this is Shale's only source of armor. A weird design choice, but it's what we've got. Starting with the large fire crystals, they grant bonuses to fire resistance, strength, defense, and combat stamina regen. The chipped and flawed crystals have small fire resistance bonuses. The clear crystal grants +1 strength, +3 defense, +30% fire res, and +1 combat stamina regen. The Flawless Crystal grants +2 strength, +6 defense, +40% fire res, and +2 combat stamina regen. And the Brilliant Crystal grants +4 strength, +9 defense, +50% fire res, and +3 combat stamina regen. Obviously, fire resistance is mainly useful against enemies like rage demons, dragons, and various enemies shooting fire arrows or casting fire spells. But the other bonuses are solid too. Strength is great for extra damage, attack, and physical resistance. The defense bonus helps Shale avoid more physical attacks. The stamina regen isn't really something Shale needs most of the time because her abilities have fairly long cooldowns. The only situation I find stamina regen to be helpful is if you want Shale to use the taunt talent a lot to keep enemies off other allies. Though Shale also has the Stone Aura ability, which makes her more likely to get hit, plus the threat and sustained, so taunt isn't as necessary. The large fire crystals are perfectly fine, and I do keep a higher tier 1 to use in dragon fights or against other enemies using fire, but they're not amazing enough to get the highest score. 4 out of 5. The large ice crystals grant bonuses to cold resistance, combat health regen, defense, and healing effects received. The chipped and flawed crystals have small cold resistance bonuses. The clear crystal grants +0.25 combat health regen, +9 defense, +40% cold res, and +10% to healing effects received. The Flawless Crystal grants +0.75 combat health regen, +9 defense, +40% cold res, and +10% to healing effects received. And the Brilliant Crystal grants +1.25 combat health regen, +15 defense, +50% cold res, and +15% to healing effects received. The scaling of these bonuses is weird, since you suddenly get +9 defense and +40 cold res from the clear tier, and they stay the same at Flawless, so you'd only want the Flawless Crystal if you want the slight bonus to health regen and slightly more armor, at the cost of more fatigue. The health regen isn't high enough to be worth it. Maybe at the Brilliant tier you can feel it, especially if you combine it with Shale's Stoneheart abilities that give her bonuses to health regen. The huge +15 defense of the Brilliant tier is also a big reason why you'd want to get it, since it would help her avoid so many enemy attacks if she's tanking. There is an important note, which is that in the base game the healing effects bonus doesn't work at all, so that part of the item is useless. But if you have Dane's Fixes, you can get this effect properly implemented so that Shale is also easier to heal with spells. The cold resistance, however, is pretty much useless since very few enemies deal cold damage. Overall, I'd only use a high tier 1 for a tank Shale if I really wanted that big defense bonus. 2 out of 5. The large lightning crystals grant bonuses to electricity resistance, dexterity, chance to dodge, and missile deflection. The chipped and flawed crystals have small electricity resistance bonuses. The clear crystal grants +2 dexterity, +30% electricity res, +5% dodge chance, and missile deflection. The Flawless Crystal grants +3 dexterity, +40% electricity res, +10% dodge chance and missile deflection, and the Brilliant Crystal grants +4 dexterity, +50% electricity res, +15% dodge chance, and +12 missile deflection. Personally, this is my choice of crystal for a tank Shale in most situations because the dodge chance is super good to avoid physical attacks on top of regular defense. Plus, you also get some points of defense from the dexterity bonus and missile deflection against ranged attacks. Very solid all around, with the only downside being the electricity resistance that doesn't do very much, since very few enemies deal electricity damage. 5 out of 5. The large natural crystals grant bonuses to nature resistance, armor, physical resistance, and constitution. The chipped and flawed crystals grant small nature resistance bonuses. The clear crystal grants +2 armor, +30% nature resistance, and +10 physical resistance. The Flawless Crystal grants +1 constitution, +3 armor, +40% nature resistance, and +15 physical resistance. And the Brilliant Crystal grants +2 constitution, +4 armor, +50% nature resistance, and +25 physical resistance. This is clearly meant for a tank build, but the issue with the physical resistance is that the main tank build for Shale involves Stone Aura, which makes her immune to all physical effects, so you don't need the Phys Res anymore. Plus, she's a golem, so she's already immune to some things. The extra armor is nice, but both the armor and constitution bonuses are just too small for this to be a great option. It's decent, and if you're doing a different kind of tanky build for Shale, or are specifically fighting enemies dealing nature damage like Deep Stalkers or Spiders, you could use it situationally. 2 out of 5. The large spirit crystals grant bonuses to spirit resistance, spell resistance, mental resistance, and all attributes. Though it's just +1 to all attributes, don't get excited. The chipped and flawed crystals grant small spirit resistance bonuses. The clear crystal grants plus 30% spirit res, plus 8% spell res, and plus 5 mental res. The flawless crystal grants plus 1 to all attributes, plus 40% spirit res, plus 12% spell res, and plus 15 mental res. And the brilliant crystal grants plus 1 to all attributes, plus 50% spirit res, plus 16% spell res, and plus 25 mental res. This is another situational crystal that is only good if you're fighting the archdemon or other enemies dealing spirit damage, which tend to be spellcasters or demons. For the archdemon fight, this is a great pick, but otherwise this isn't that good against spellcasters because the spell resistance is too low. And unlike other characters, Shale doesn't get extra sources of spell resistance from other equipment. If you want, you can try using this in the Circle Tower and see if it's better than the Fire Crystal, but I expect this will not be as good, especially since you need it to be at Flawless or Brilliant for the spell resistance to be at least somewhat significant. So the large spirit crystals get a 2 out of 5. I usually don't bother using them at all, other than maybe the archdemon fight. For the sake of completionism, there is one more large crystal in big quotation marks for Shale. Uncrushable Pigeon, her prank gift. This one doesn't confer any armor, obviously, it's a pigeon, but it does have 9 defense. The fatigue penalty is the same as for the tier 1 aka chipped crystals, and it grants plus 4 damage, minus 4 dexterity, and low morale. In the base game, low morale does nothing, but even without it, you're just getting terrible stats. The penalty to dex removes 4 out of the 9 defense the pigeon gives you, and it also gives you penalties to attack and physical resistance. The extra damage is something, but it really isn't worth it. If you have Dane's fixes and the low morale fix installed in particular, then the low morale stat will give Shale penalties of minus 2 armor, minus 5 defense, and minus 2 damage, making this item an absolute nightmare if it wasn't already. Anyway, if it wasn't clear, the Uncrushable Pigeon gets a 1 out of 5. It looks very funny, and it's thematically a great prank gift for Shale considering her hatred of birds, but it's not actually usable as an item unless you want to handicap yourself. With this terrible item, we've reached the end of the special companion gear ranking. I find this to be a somewhat disappointing list of items because of the lack of variety. Shale at least gets some variety because of the different elemental types of damage she can do with the small crystals, and the large crystals giving her different offensive, utility, and defensive bonuses, and most of her crystal types can be used in viable builds, other than maybe the ice crystals, which are just too weak. But with Dog, the Kaddis and collars aren't super varied, and also don't necessarily give our Mabari enough stats. It would have been cool to see a few magical collars or Kaddis that would have unique appearances and grant more interesting bonuses. Something like Interrupt Spellcasting would have been cool from a Lyrium enchanted Kaddis that could glow white-blue like Fenris's tattoos, or Damage vs Darkspawn from a Warden-specific Warpaint. There could have been lots of cool ideas, but I'm guessing they may not have intended for Dog to be a serious companion, and they just added some items later on when they realized that the Mabari could be fun to have as a permanent party member. In any case, despite the limited options, there's still some great items in here that do absolutely make these special companions feel quite good in your party, so it's not that bad. I hope you found this deep dive and scoring of Dog and Shale's items interesting. If you enjoyed this, I hope you stick around for the future rankings, guides, and discussion videos I'm going to make about games I care about. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or maybe even become a channel member. Everything helps. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.